The settlement of Lashik was taken by brute force by the skeletal hosts of Arkhan the Black. Now, the time to expand further had come. Before heading east to take the Black Pyramid of Nagash, Arkhan the Black knew he had to fight the rest of the errant knights that threatened his plans. Facing now, against Repanse de Lyonesse, the Lich King knew he had to take no chances against the Damsel of War, as the Bretonnian was more than a worthy opponent. Repanse had plans of her own, as she could not allow the Dark Host to grow even further. She set her plans in motion, and both forces would soon face against each other in the hot deserts of Araby. This is episode 4 of this narrative campaign series that focuses on Arkhan the Black's quest in the lands of Araby and his fight against the Bretonnians in the region. To get the full context of the ongoing story, make sure to watch episodes 1, 2, and 3 of the series. With the entire region of the Land of Assassins finally under the Lich King's control, Arkhan began preparations for the next phase of his plan to expand further into the lands of Araby and eliminate all the errant Bretonnian knights. With a solid presence in the region and more power to negotiate, a secret meeting was convened with the ravenous beastmen that had a menacing presence in those arid lands. A non-aggression pact was agreed between the undead legions of Arkhan and the beastmen warherds. It is not clear what the Lich King negotiated exactly with the Beast Lord, or how he managed to convince the Dark Forces to come to a truce, but when the meeting ended, a temporary unholy alliance was formed, and both parties were seemingly satisfied with the terms. Before Arkhan could make any further moves towards the Black Pyramid or any other target, he had one unexpected menace waiting for him. Cloaked in shadows and well hidden, the Paladin, Henry the Massive, managed to survive the onslaught on Lashik and was set on one clear goal: to kill Arkhan the Black at all costs, even if it required sacrificing his own life. Henry the Massive was a valiant Bretonnian. From a young age he was trained and raised as an honorable man. One day, his village was attacked by twisted beasts emerging from a dark forest nearby. Many died on that fateful night, but many more would have lost their lives if it were not for the efforts of Henry, who fought against the beast like a blessed knight. At the end, they had to retreat, and Henry was taken away by friendly hands, wounded but fighting until the very last moment. For his sheer act of heroism, he became renowned across the fair lands and continued training to become one of the Chevaliers of Lyonesse, and eventually the most trusted paladin of Repanse de Lyonesse, or the Damoiselle de Guerre, as she is known throughout Bretonnia. Henry the Massive knew Arkhan had set his sights on Repanse, and he would do anything to stop the Lich King from moving against her. Right when the opportunity presented itself, the valiant paladin broke his disguise and lunged himself against the Lich King, but he was a fraction of a second too slow. Prince Arkhan the Exalted intervened and managed to stop the assassination attempt. The skeletal priest quickly immobilized the surprised attacker, and Henry the Massive was mortally wounded.
Your servant's head will be returned on a spike!
With a sharp, poisonous blade, Arkhan sapped his energies to a shell, and with some twisted interrogation methods, he attempted to break the Bretonnian. With his last breath, Henry mocked the petty skeleton prince. He would not reveal any information to the Dark Host. So passed away Henry the Massive, with his quest unfulfilled, but with his loyalty and honor unbroken. Although any information about their enemy would always be useful, the fact that the Paladin didn't reveal any didn't bother Arkhan. He had collected enough clues already to decide on his next course of action. The Lich King gave Prince Aharon his next mission. He would ride north with the target in sight, Repanse de Lyonesse. Repanse is the Duchess of Lyonesse. She earned her reputation by her valiant actions when defending the city of Couronne, when it was besieged by the Chaos Lord Arkhan the Black. In the darkest of hours, the damsel had a vision of the Lady of the Lake. She knew she had to defend the city, and after the manifestation, she bravely set off to battle the Chaos host by grabbing an ancient sword and standing defiant against the enemy, inspiring many of the already fleeing knights to fight alongside her. When the Chaos Lord was face to face against the damsel, he raised his great sword above his grimacing visage, but he was momentarily dazzled by Repanse's new radiant aura. In that moment, she beheaded him with a single sword stroke. Couronne was saved, and the fleeing enemy were pursued to the sea and swiftly put down. From that day, her sword and armor glowed with the brilliant light of divine intervention. Her eyes shone with terrible judgment, and her voice cried forth damnation upon her enemies. The growing menace of the Lich King and his dark host needed to be taken care of immediately. Repanse sent word to her Bretonnian allies along the coast of Araby. She requested their support to fight Arkhan the Black and deal with the undead threat once and for all. Soon, she received some dire news. Her Bretonnian allies were not able to help, due to them being in the middle of a fierce struggle against the beastmen herds that were suddenly attacking en masse, plundering and running rampant in their territories. They were using all their available resources and manpower to contain them. Repanse and her knights were alone in their war against the Lich King. Despite this, the Bretonnians were not ones to back out from a fight, and they made their own preparations in anticipation of the inevitable bloodshed to come. Not all news was bad, however, as a small expedition of Chevaliers de Lyonesse received the damsel's message and were making their way south to reinforce their main army. Prince Aharon, the Exalted, successfully reached Repanse's army. They were well defended, inside the settlement of COPHER, but the prince was set on killing the renowned knight. He infiltrated the crowded place, moving from cover to cover, and blending himself amongst the people, and disappearing before anyone could notice any suspicious activity. The place was busy with vibrant movement. Some carried weapons and war equipment from one place to another, while others constructed barricades, reinforced the gates, and shut doors and windows. Despite his best efforts, the deadly skeletal agent failed to kill or wound the Damsel of War, as she was well protected at all times. But Aharon did not return empty-handed. He gathered enough information to know that the Chevaliers of Lyonesse were planning to ride out of the settlement of COPHER shortly. The exact reason for their movement was still unknown to the undead prince, but this information was all he needed for now. With this valuable knowledge, the Dark Host made their move. Shrouded in dark energies, the powerful Lich Priest Berekt channeled the winds of magic to trigger a sandstorm. Initially, it began manifesting as heavy clouds of dust that devoured everything in their path with a thin veil of sand. But quickly it morphed into wild gusts of wind, forming deadly tornadoes that took shape and dissolved with unnatural speed and ferocity. The heavy storm began to move slowly to the north, towards the settlement of COPHER. Every citizen in the Bretonnian hold watched in horror at the approaching sandstorm. Now made of black and purple clouds, the unnatural winds formed strange faces that lasted an instant before diffusing themselves into the clouds. Heavy thunder, accompanied by purple flashes, announced the imminent arrival of the Dark Host. But as the sandstorm got closer and closer to the settlement, the clouds began dispersing and settling. An intense bright light irradiated from the city center. Repanse and her court prophetess were gathered there. They prayed to the Lady of the Lake, and she was answering with her divine blessings. It seemed that the dark energies could not enter the settlements while the Lady's protection was with them. After an entire day of struggling, Brecht stopped his dark ritual, unable to overpower Repanse and her prophetess in their battle of wills. The dark clouds finally dissipated, and the way was clear. When the dust settled, an entire army of skeletons was found, dangerously close to COPHER. It was the army of Sarthus, the defender of the Fate, imbued with dark energies and counting with a menacing number of skeletal units at his disposal. It posed a serious threat to Repanse and her knights, if not dealt with immediately. Sarthus' army was killing every living being in their path, and with them, treasures were taken, trade routes were compromised, and innocent lives were lost. Many skirmishes were fought to halt the sudden advance of Prince Sarthus in the region, but his forces were too numerous, and the Bretonnian pockets of resistance were taken mostly by surprise. They needed to be taken care of with the blunt force of a proper army of knights. Repanse didn't know the location of Arkhan's main army, as it was nowhere to be found, but there was no time to locate it, before Prince Sarthus' undead legions made their next move. So it was that the Damsel of War chose to ride out and fight against Sarthus, and deal with that immediate menace before refocusing on the Lich King. Both armies met in an oasis located just a few miles south of the settlement. When Repanse and her knights arrived, they were being expected by Sarthus, who had hidden some units in the nearby rock formations and vegetation. When the armies clashed, the superiority of the Chevaliers of Lyonesse was quickly noted. Repanse moved from one formation to another, issuing orders and fighting with sheer determination. An aura of light and protection surrounded the mighty Duchess of Lyonesse. Skeletons fell by the dozens, but more and more emerged from different points and began surrounding the Bretonnians.
Warriors of Lyonesse, behold! Even here, the lady watches over the brave and the righteous. The signs are clear. Just as in Coron, when we rode forth to vanquish the evil that threatened to overcome it, we must do so again. The lady compels us to lend our hands to this noble fight. Chevaliers, charge!
The skeletons surrounding the knights were many, but their attacks proved to be ineffective against the heavily protected mounted warriors and the organized mobs of men-at-arms supporting them, all inspired by the presence of Repanse. Sarthus ran against the Blessed Knight to challenge her in a duel. Fighting with all their might, Prince Sarthus and Repanse battled fiercely, swinging their weapons against each other. The Damsel of War was a highly skilled warrior, and it showed. Slowly but surely, the Dark Prince was breaking apart against her might. In the middle of the battle, skeletal hands began suddenly rising from the sands, coming up from seemingly everywhere. New enemies emerged to immediately attack the Bretonnians. Before the knights could fully realize what was going on, a frightening horn sounded atop a nearby hill. Vast legions of even more skeletal warriors advanced in formation. Crypt ghouls and chariots covered ground quickly in their unrelenting advance, all rolling down against the Bretonnian army. Arkhan the Black, accompanied by Brecht, watched as their army pushed forth to crush the knights fighting ahead. How the Lich King had managed to hide himself and a full army of skeletons was beyond comprehension. But in that moment of terror, Repanse realized they had been ambushed. Using the cover of the dark sandstorm, Arkhan had buried himself and his legions in the nearby dunes, to emerge when the time was right. Using Sarthus as bait, Arkhan would strike when the knights were already winded by the fierce fight. Filled with dread, the men-at-arms supporting the knights glimpsed at each other, not knowing what to do. They looked upon their leader, searching for direction against the growing panic and chaos. Repanse knew that they had been surrounded, but she wouldn't show any signs of despair. Instead, she rode forth to confront the newly arrived enemy head-on, leaving Prince Sarthus behind, badly wounded, but not finished.
Hear me, brothers! The foul, undead kings of these lands want to see the world bow to the dark shroud of their rule. This greatly offends the lady. I may have been born a peasant, but it has been my life's purpose to ensure that men of the righteous and good triumph over evil in all forms. I fear no evil, for I am guided by the lady's divine will. She watches over me and shows me the way, just as my faith in her guides me and gives me strength. Have faith in me, and I shall do the same for you. To battle, chevaliers!
In the middle of the battlefield, Arkhan the Black fought against Repanse de Lyonesse. The damsel of war fought with all her might, blessed with a halo of light that inspired all Bretonnians around her. But the Lich King was imbued with dark energies that seemed to burn and consume the air itself. Against the overwhelming numbers of skeletons and ghouls, the Bretonnians began to falter, and some of them began to flee for their lives, seeking to retreat to COPHER and get behind the safety of the walls. Repanse knew they couldn't fight against two armies, and fought to gain time for some of the knights to retreat. As she fought with her dwindling energies, she prayed to the Lady for deliverance, for the power and strength to at least hold the dark armies back enough to save her fellow knights and peasants. But she was at the Lich King's hands, and the odds were overwhelming. The Bretonnians saw in horror as Repanse was consumed in a mob of darkness and death, as the damsel of war fell to the sands, lifeless. From there, the remaining Bretonnians were swiftly cut down, while only a few managed to escape the devastating ambush. In the meantime, the Tomb King Ahab, the Graceful, had intercepted the small force of remaining Chevaliers de Lyonesse that were making their way to reinforce Repanse. The army of Bretonnians was now cornered against the coast. The Tomb King's army was vast, and the living warriors knew they had no chance against such odds. To make matters worse, the army of undead was reinforced by massive carrions and unnatural bats that darkened the skies and attacked them with their deadly talons. The cornered army fought valiantly, even holding on to the slight hope that Repanse would help them, but to no avail. They were swiftly put to the sword, and the beach was tainted with blood. Before the sun set that day, Ahab was standing atop the lifeless bodies of many of Bretonnia's finest knights. Arkhan the Black, having sustained minor damage against Repanse's main army, set to immediately siege the nearby settlement of COPHER. Now, without the protection of Repanse, they would surely fall in no time. With hundreds of skeletal warriors at their disposal, and aided by their dark magic spells, Arkhan and Brecht raised massive siege towers to take on the settlement. Their walls were tall, but they wouldn't stop the Lich King. The doom of the Bretonnians was inevitable. Guillaume Beaumont was the knight in charge of the defenses on COPHER. The Bretonnians had prepared as much as they could, but now the Lich King was at the gates, and the time to fight was now. The odds seemed overwhelming, but Guillaume had one clear mission in mind: to take out the head of the snake. Only by cutting the source of dark power could the rest of the legions crumble to dust. The siege began, and the fight for the walls quickly turned fierce. The defenders fought for their lives, knowing what had happened to their fellow errant knights in their wars against the Lich King. If they lost against the undead, they would all surely face the same fate as the settlement of Lashik and all the other victims the Dark Host had claimed. During the battle, Brecht, the most loyal of the Lich King's advisors, was killed by Guillaume Beaumont. The knight had seized a moment of opportunity to attack him directly, quickly breaking down the ancient bones of the Lich Priest. Infuriated by the loss of his right hand up until that moment, Arkhan worded a dark incantation and killed Guillaume, leeching his spirit with deadly magic, leaving his lifeless body to fall to the ground. When his fellow knights and peasants saw this, they were disheartened. The massive tomb scorpion, now famed as Lashik's Lament by the Bretonnians of the region, due to its deadly performances against the Knights of the Flame, caused devastating havoc and panic within the settlements. Dozens of Bretonnians perished under its massive hulk as they failed to wound the imposing construct, which moved with surprising speed. The streets were quickly overrun by the hundreds and hundreds of ghouls and skeletons flooding the place. Soon enough, the Chevaliers de Lyonesse were no more. It was a tragic day for the knights errant in the region, and for all of the Bretonnians. A blow that would forever mark the history of both races, and that would blemish with bad blood the sands of Araby for years to come. In the aftermath, the armies of Prince Sarthas, the Defender of the Fates, and Tomb King Ahab the Graceful rallied with Arkhan the Black. Brecht was no more. But Bakari, another powerful Lich Priest, rose in his place. No setback would put a halt to Arkhan's advance. The knights were taken care of. The armies of the Lich King were ready to march east towards the Black Pyramid of Nagash. The day when Arkhan finally succeeds in resurrecting his Dark Master grows closer and closer. And on that day, the Tomb Kings shall be destroyed, and the world shall drown in death.
On this channel, we are putting together narrative Total War cinematic battles and Warhammer lore videos. A special thank you goes to our Patreon supporters who help us in the making of more content. You can also join Patreon and earn extra perks while supporting the videos to come. Find the link in the description below. Make sure to subscribe, and thank you for watching. See you on the next one.